Time for some more Kitchen Table Astronomy with Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hameed, and we're going to talk about some interesting new endeavors into space. But before we do that, Mr. Universe, we're going to put on your other hat, your Amherst
Hold on.
cinema hat.
Even before we do that, Monty, I see that you brought some dino socks.
Yes, we've given all of our regular guests a classic public radio swag as a thank you. So Khalees made cookies for you, as did my son Pax.
Love those.
Yeah, and we got you a mug that has a scenic design from the 413 on it, and then the NEPM socks with Holyokensis podecasaurus, the official dinosaur of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And so, so maybe we'll be doing one of the interviews, me, just in those socks.
I think that would, the video version of it would be, people would watch that. Yeah, so your contributions to public radio here on this show have been honored by these things that we give to people who help support public radio, and we need you now.
Thank you so much.
Back to your other role, Mr. Universe, as a board member for Amherst Cinema. The Oscars were last night. Honora, the big winner, the director of Amherst Cinema, Yasmin Chin Eisenhower, reached out to Khalees and I earlier this year or last year and said, you guys got to come to this screening of Honora. It's my favorite movie of the year. And lo and behold, big winner last night.
Absolutely. And I think it was my favorite movie as well. We have talked about it before. It's a small film, as the director said. It was made for $6 million. Sean Baker, the director, he also won for Best Directing Oscar, and there were like total 5 Academy Awards that it won. And if you haven't seen this director's earlier films, like for example, The Florida Project or Tangerine and others, do see those. Those are all, again, those are small films, but with a lot of heart. Yeah. And I also loved Honora. I do have to say one thing. Often, like now, because there is a lot of hype about it, a lot of buzz about it, and people go with very high expectations of a particular type of movie. I think this is a type of film which is great on the big screen. Mm-hmm. When you are immersed in it and you don't pause or you don't sort of like say, I'm going to watch half of it today and half of it tomorrow. You have to be in it because there are lots of ups and downs in it, and you have to experience those when you are watching it in one go. And so I think, because I've had discussions about that, and people go like, oh, I thought Honora was like amazing, but when I was watching it on TV, it just like, no, that's the whole thing. And the Sean Baker, the director, actually made a perfect pitch for watching films on big screen and also for independent cinema.
And making films for the big screen, to encourage directors and writers to make movies for the corporate experience of being together in a theater and watching it together.
But with just the appropriate caution. I should add, there is a lot of sex and nudity in the film.
Yeah, they did thank sex workers, everybody, 201 who won an award. So that tells you something about what the movie is about. But if that's not troublesome to you, it is a wonderful, fun ride. We have a little ballot game that we play when we watch the Oscars. I went over to my friend Bob Kraskowski's house, who's the director and writer of the Sam Elliott movie, The Man Who Killed Hitler and then The Bigfoot, and it's got some other big movies in the works right now. He correctly guessed 7 of the 23 Oscars. I correctly guessed 12 of the 23 Oscars. And my 17-year-old son, Enzo, who is going to go to college for film school, got 17 of the 23. He just creamed us.
He always does, doesn't he?
He does. I don't know. I'm going to take him to Vegas.
I think that would work. But I should add one other thing. While we talk about Honora and we talk about other things, and one of the wins for Honora for the Best Actress, even though Mackie Madison was amazing, but I still think that Demi Moore for The Substance, which was also an excellent film, I think that would...
And a low-budget film, too. Another not huge Hollywood film, an indie film. I was a little sad for Demi Moore, but she won all the other awards, so I feel good for her, too.
And the Best Documentary Feature.
Yes.
No Other Land, which is about West Bank, and it is made by a Palestinian and an Israeli filmmaker that won for the Best Documentary Feature. That is excellent. But I should also mention that that particular film, even though it has won many awards, it is still does not have a distributor. As far until yesterday, it does not have a distributor in the U.S. And I think that is just crazy. And even though it does not have a distributor in the US, it is still being screened in different places, including in Western Mass. It is playing at Amherst Cinema, and it is also playing as part of the Multicultural Film Festival at UMass Amherst. So if you do get a chance, I mean, it's a tough film, but I love their speeches as well, because it was about the fact that this is the type of thing that people from all sides have to come together to speak what is going on in terms of the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians to a certain degree. So I think it's an important film. It's a really crucial film, and I'm so glad that it was recognized at the Oscars.
All right. We'll put your Amherst Cinema hat away for the moment and take your Hampshire College Kynott Studios hat and put it on, and we're going to talk about some interesting missions to outer space.
There are, right now, as we speak, there is a private mission to the moon that actually just landed. It's the Blue Ghost lander by Firefly Aerospace. This is a Texas-based...
The Space Ghost lander?
The Blue Ghost.
Okay.
The Blue Ghost lander. Space Ghost, that would be cool.
I love Space Ghost. Space Ghost Coast to Coast, one of the greatest shows of all time.
And we will talk more about that, because this is not the only one. And the amazing thing about this one, just to add, that this is the first attempt by this particular group. There are a lot of these private spacecrafts now going to the moon, taking NASA payloads, for example, and also other private companies, their experiments and things like that. This is their first attempt, and it has been successful, which is rare. And if I remember correctly, I think only China's missions are the only ones that have actually successfully done on the first go. But we will talk more, because there is another one, Intuitive Machines, that is expected to make a landing on the moon, I think, this coming Thursday.
Okay.
So we can actually put it together. But what I want to talk about today is a complicated question regarding space as inspiration. And the reason I'm putting it as complicated will become clear in a minute. But there are two stories that came out a couple of days ago. One was that there was a press release that said that China, or Chinese Space Agency, is going to train astronauts from Pakistan to actually take them to the Chinese space station. And I think
that's where you're from.
So not from the space station.
Not from China either, but from Pakistan.
Right. So that I think is really cool. And in fact, this is something that they had been talking about, and this is for, in some sense, space powers, or taking sort of people from countries that do not have the same capabilities, and this is also a little bit like from the global South perspective. This is an agreement on the selection and training of Pakistani astronauts and their participation in Chinese space station missions. It is expected to happen in a year or so. So they're going to select. There's going to be a selection process, selected, and then after that, an astronaut from Pakistan is going to go to the space station. And of course, no Pakistani has been to space. And I think that's a great opportunity in some sense to create inspiration, because I think if done correctly, and I think this is the type of things that in the 60s, for example, the Apollo program, I mean, it was a different context because, of course, the US was doing that stuff. China is right now doing it. Nevertheless, if you see somebody that looks like you, that sort of talks like you, that is from your culture, trained and then going to the space station, going to space, there is a buzz that gets created around it. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity for a country like Pakistan, for example, to really build structures around it. This is a great opportunity to have science museums, a planetaria, to have STEM programs, to say, look, hey, what happens in space? And yes, people can go to space. Even though Pakistan is not the one who's launching it, nevertheless, this is a great opportunity. But I also fear within that thing, because there is also the negative side of nationalism that comes in. And of course, with Pakistan, it's competition with India. India is also sending its astronauts through NASA, by the way. They are being trained, and India has its own space program. They are also planning its own space station. I actually don't think Pakistan and India are anywhere close to the same playing field. I mean, India is way ahead. Nevertheless, I mean, I think that would be a huge loss if for Pakistan it becomes more like, hey, we are going to space before you. But no, China is just taking you up there. But it can still offer a lot of inspiration. And so it's a little bit tricky. So when I was thinking about these things of how going to space, so even though the astronauts are not going to go on their own, like rocket from Pakistan, it will be going from Chinese rockets. That space station is Chinese. Nevertheless, there is a process of training. There is a process of being involved in experiments, for example, scientific experiments in the Chinese space station. There is, so there are a lot of things that actually come in there and which I can imagine serve as inspiration for kids. But alongside with that, I heard the news that Jeff Bezos' Blue Origins, for example, is planning on, he has a rocket, a New Shepard, and that is going to take an all-woman crew. So 6 women that are going to go to space. Now, so that was interesting. And again, the framing of it. And it was, so this is the same kind of flight that they did a few years ago where Jeff Bezos himself went, but also William Shatner, for example. And famously, William Shatner came back, not immediately, but certainly later on, he thought that it was a dark experience for him because it really gave him the perspective about what is happening on Earth.
Right.
So you never know how that's going to go. But to me, this was a tricky thing because it was billed as the first all-woman crew. And so certainly this is the type of thing, so it can be an inspiration. But this is also done by a billionaire who's just saying, hey, here is a rocket. And all these people are going to be just in there. They're not flying it. They're not doing anything. I mean, I'm not sure how to look at it because it's not a crew, it's passengers because it's an 11-minute. So they go up to about 100 kilometers, which is considered by definition sort of like, space. And they're going to go in for 11 minutes and then come back. And the people that are going there are also influential and rich. So, for example, pop singer Katy Perry.
She's one of the ones going up?
She's one of the ones going up. Gayle King, the sort of like, host of the morning show on CBS. And certainly those are things that are going to give a huge amount of publicity to Blue Origins. Then Lauren Sanchez, she's the fiancée of Jeff Bezos. And then there's a film producer. There is a former NASA engineer. And there is an entrepreneur from Vietnam also going. And so I'm very conflicted about it, how to think about it, right? I mean, like, that is it sort of like, they're just going in. It's not exactly a crew because they don't do anything. It's all like, programmed. And they go in and then they come back. And there is a really nice article, and for the video perspective, we're going to provide a link to it in the description. It's in The Guardian by Sarah Manavis. And the article is titled, Jeff Bezos takes one small step for feminism and social progress and one giant leap for self-publicity. And I think that is appropriate. So again, inspiration for what, right? I mean, this is the type of thing that in the same week where we announced that, he actually killed he directed that the opinion section of a newspaper, one of the major newspapers, institutional newspapers, Washington Post, that it will not have dissent in it and it's going to just have particular viewpoint about liberty and sort of like,
economics or something
free
like
markets.
Yeah, free market, right.
And where his editor resigned from it and he was given that option that either you follow that directive or you go.
Yeah.
So here is a billionaire, and again, we already have another billionaire who also wants to go to space, who is dismantling the federal government.
And DEI, which is strange given that Jeff Bezos is now doing something that would probably fall under the category of DEI with an all-female space trip.
But is it? But that's the thing, right? I mean, but ultimately, he is framing it that way, and it brings him back into the news in a different way.
Right.
SpaceX is ahead in terms of compared to Blue Origins, but this is all for tourism. This is all for his company.
Yeah.
And this is not. I mean, the fact that you can also say, okay, so why would you pick these people? And these are also being from the context of here is a billionaire who say, okay, well, here are the people. Either they can pay, and it's undisclosed what amount of money that you have to pay for a ride in this, but it's a couple of $100,000 at least per passenger. So you have to belong to a certain thing, or you have to have enough influence. I mean, I don't know whether Gayle King, for example, is paying her trip, or whether she has been there or she's on the trip because there's going to be a 2-hour live coverage of it when she goes up there, and that's free publicity that you are getting on CBS. And she has been criticized by somebody from Washington Post because they said, like, hey, instead of banding together, that this is the same guy who is gutting Washington Post.
Right.
And then you are writing on it. So it's a complex question. I can also imagine sort of like, that, yeah, I mean, it is great for inspiration for women to see, girls, to see that. But to me, there's something, not something problematic. There are a lot of things that are problematic about this type of mission, which, again, gives this tremendous power to the billionaires, and billionaires can buy their things off. And so that is one of those things where that's how SpaceX, that's how Elon Musk has made its way, and that's how he can cut these things, because, I mean, NASA is being cut right now. Jeff Bezos is somebody who is controlling the newspapers from the media perspective, and then he does that. So I think we have to figure out how to think about these things, and whether this inspiration that I mentioned, sort of like, how to balance it out, how to think about it, what makes the inspiration within the context of this kind of profit making, this kind of space tourism. I mean, ultimately, it is about Jeff Bezos' power, it is about Jeff Bezos' publicity, and it is about his business of astrotourism.
I want to look one thing up real quick. If you're looking for some real inspiration that comes from people who have worked with NASA and have been publicly funded and aren't billionaires and are leading the programs, we've got our own astronaut, Katie Coleman, of course, in Shelburne Falls, who reached out to me to remind me and you, the listener, that on March 9th, which is this Sunday, Cian Proctor is an astronaut who flew 3 days in space on the Inspiration 4 flight and is speaking at the Springfield Symphony. So there are inspirational folks, even locally, to look to if going to outer space is your dream.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is the genuine one, right? I mean, in this particular case, again, if I can, I'm conflicted about it. We have talked about it. Space has always been sort of like, fascination for me, that humans should go to space, I should go to space, and all of that stuff. But when I see these type of news items, there is a reaction that happens, and how do we contextualize it? The inspiration becomes cheap. Inspiration becomes in the service of capitalism. It becomes in the service of not just capitalism, but exploitative capitalism, because Jeff Bezos is the one who's been against the unions as well. His practices in Amazon are not there. Elon Musk with Tesla, the kind of treatment of workers over there, and now the treatment of all federal workers. So they use this narrative of inspiration for their own exploitative gains. They exploit the narrative of inspiration, and apart from everything else, my problem that comes in is that Elon Musk then has this grander statements about saving humanity that he's doing, because he wants to go to Mars so that humans have another place. So does Jeff Bezos. He actually argues that his work on space, he wants to build industries in orbit or on the moon because Earth cannot handle those things. So he's also trying to save the Earth. And I think it's this sense of grandeur, I think, that becomes a deep problem in there, because that justifies a lot of their bad actions. Not to mention that even in the very short range, there's his business of tourism or his people going into space for 100 kilometers for just for 10 minutes or 11 minutes, it is deeply damaging from the environmental perspective. So if you are trying to save the environment, well, if you don't have the rocket go up for 10 minutes just to, provide other rich people a little bit of a view, well, don't do that.
Yeah.
That will save a lot of environment too. But that is not the case. Ultimately, it's about their own profits. And that's, but it gets framed, it gets draped in inspiration, in the talk of inspiration, and draped in the sense of talk of saving humans or saving the earth. But ultimately, it's about their own profits.